I'm nervous, and I'm not lying either. I've been nervous all day. I was sitting there watching the Virginia Tech football game, and my palms were sweating like they are just prior to a big ball game. But it wasn't because of the Tech football game I was watching. It was because I was going to make this speech tonight. I've got kind of a special relationship with Coach Patteson and his family, and it's going to be hard for me to give this talk. It's going to be a lot more sentimental than the ones you've heard. My relationship starts with Coach Patteson, I guess around 1951 when I was born. I guess Coach had just graduated maybe from high school a couple years before. I'm not sure the exact date. But my earliest remembrance of Coach Patteson was on Friday nights after a Greenway victory at the McClarity's house, celebrating the win until maybe 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I was too little then to, know what time it was. The McClarity kids and the Ragsdale kids would be asleep by the time it all ended. But those are certainly some of my early remembrances of Coach Patteson. Then I remember right across the street here when the Pattesons had a celebration for my parents' wedding anniversary when I was probably 5th grade, something like that. I remember that. So see, my connection with Coach Patteson is not just as a coach player or as an adversary on the court or, coaching in a football game, but it's much different. Something that hadn't been mentioned here tonight, Coach Patteson started Little League baseball and Little League basketball here at Narrows. I can remember our first meeting over on the football field and how excited we were to be able to play Little League baseball. And that first year we wore dungarees and a different colored shirt for, depending on which team you were on. I remember Little League basketball. We would come over on Saturday morning here at the gym, and he would have his varsity players like Bob Burton down here working with us. And then later on, when I got into high school, I got to coach one of those teams. I remember Joey Turner was one of my best players. I remember one lesson I learned that I remember to this very day, and I use it to this very day in my coaching. I was a PE assistant. Coach Patteson was busy doing something, so he sent me out to get them warmed up. And I remember one of the exercises we did was squat thrust. You don't ever see that anymore. We do it in our warm-ups before the ball game. It's a great exercise. But he sent me out to do the warm-ups, and I proceeded to go out and sit down on the first row of the bleachers to get them warmed up. Big mistake, sitting down. Coach Patteson came out the door, came around the corner. I don't remember the exact words he used, but the bottom line was, how can you sit on your rear end and expect those boys out there to do their warm-up like it ought to be done? And I remember that to this day. I learned a lesson. I never sit down. If I take our football team into the weight room after practice, we may have been out there 3 hours, but I'm not going to sit down. I'm going to stay on my feet. And when I coached basketball, the same thing. I was never going to sit down. And that was a simple lesson, but I learned it from him. Some of the best coaching that takes place is at the high school level. We've got this concept that these college coaches and pro coaches and everything, they know so much and everything like that. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I never had a better coach than Coach Bill Patteson. And I played on some pretty darn good basketball teams in college with some darn good basketball players. But I'm going to tell you, the coaching we got was no better, probably not as good, is what I got here at Narrows High School. And I remember my freshman coach saying to me, you know, you're not the fastest thing in the world and you're not the tallest thing in the world, but you are sound fundamentally. It's interesting that Coach said that he always looked forward to the Giles Narrows football game. I was totally the opposite. And it was the same way in basketball. I really hated playing Narrows. And it wasn't so much because I knew it was going to be a tough ball game, because I knew it was going to be. And it wasn't so much that I knew that Narrows was going to play extremely hard and hustle their tail ends off, because I knew they were always going to do that. In fact, I used to marvel when I first started coaching, how does Coach Patteson get his players to play so hard? I wish I could do the same. But I always hated playing Narrows because it was like playing a member of my family. And I hated doing that. It's pretty easy to coach against somebody that perhaps you maybe don't like so well or you don't respect so much. But it was really difficult for me to coach against Coach Patteson. Win, lose, or draw, didn't matter. And I was always felt relieved when the ball game was over, regardless of the outcome. After my dad died, who was one of the first people to come to the back door? It was Bill Patteson. And of course, Alan McClarity, to talk to us about setting up a memorial scholarship. I certainly remember that. Coach, you might be interested to know, the summer before my dad died, he sat down and he wrote down his all-time football team over a period of 30-some years, position by position. I've got the little card at home right now. It's no bigger than that. There were 2 assistant coaches on that team. You guessed it, Bill Patteson, Alan McClarity. You talking about a coaching staff, that has to be one of the all-time greats. I've done a lot of study, and I try every year to read 1 or 2 books on great coaches. Vince Lombardi, Bo Schembechler, Lou Holtz, John Wooden, Dean Smith, you name them, I've read some about them. And they've all got one common characteristic that I think is critical to success as a coach. And that is, they are all, or were all, taskmasters. That is, they do not accept anything less than perfection, knowing that they're never going to get it. And they demand that perfection, day in and day out. As Tom Landry said in a book about him that I read, the essence of coaching is getting people to do what they don't want to do. And I'm going to tell you, by that definition, Bill Patteson is about as good a coach as there is anywhere or ever has been. I could sit up here and say, you know, how Coach Patteson affected me in my life. I think it's obvious from what I've said. I can't enumerate the different ways, but I'm sure every day that I live my life, and particularly in my coaching career, that he's had a tremendous influence on me. Finally, I have really enjoyed tonight. This thing is great, and y'all should be commended for doing it. It's a well-deserved honor, and I'm certainly honored to be here. Thank you very much.